Jim, it's great to have you here with us today, and welcome. You can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, let's see if I can do everything in the right order here. Nope, I didn't. Okay, how is that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, well, we'll get started here. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with the scenario this picture illustrates of just kind of sitting at a desk at home or a messy room. Maybe with something that looks fairly nice on top, because that's the only thing people are going to see as you talk to them. But I toyed with the idea of calling this session Journalism in Your Jammies, but we'll just stick with how to find great stories when you can't be there in person. The other topic or title that I toyed with was Everything Everywhere All at Once, because not only was that last year's Oscar winner for Best Picture, but it may be how a lot of us feel about what our jobs demand of us in missions communication, is that we really, at least in my role with Wycliffe, I feel like the whole world is my beat sometimes, which is impossible, but that is still kind of the unspoken expectation sometimes. So we'll get into some of that as well. Let me start by showing you a picture from 2014. I went to Jordan to do stories about the war in Syria and the refugees that were pouring into the country of Jordan. So this is me with an interpreter and some people from a Syrian family in a refugee camp in a tent outside of Amman, Jordan. And I just show you this to say there really is no substitute for being there. As we talk today, it'll be clear that we are doing the best we can, sometimes with limited resources. But if you can get to a venue for the story, it's always going to be better. There's just so much you gain by being part of that world and by meeting people and doing more than just a face on a screen or something. But that's not always possible. So this is the McLaren 720S. This is a car there is no substitute for, similar for there being no substitute for being there. This car goes 341 miles per hour, 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, and it is often recognized as the best car in the world. Base price, if you're interested, is $321,000. Now, I will show you my 2010 Chrysler minivan. It is never recognized as the best car in the world. It goes 0 to 60 in, well, it does go 0 to 60. It leaks oil. It has a cracked windshield that I'm getting replaced tomorrow, in fact. The tires are nearly bald. You could literally buy 100 of these Chrysler minivans for less money than that McLaren would cost you. But yet, this is the car that's available to me, and it still gets me where I need to go. And knock on wood, it still runs. So I'm using it. So I wonder if we might think of that Chrysler minivan as the equivalent of what most of us are working with in terms of resources for gathering stories. And I just thought of a few things here. I'm sure you can think of more, but reduced or eliminated travel budgets is a huge one. Limited staff and time. Maybe it isn't considered a high priority. Health-related stuff, COVID obviously being the main thing there, but there can be other health-related issues why you can't get to a place, or politically related travel restrictions. So all of that can combine or work individually to keep us out of places where we would love to get stories. But we have this readily available to us, the greatest set of communication tools humanity has ever known. I mean, think about what we have. We're here talking on Zoom. We have smartphones. We have fast internet. We have slow internet. we have the ability to share huge files anywhere in the world. I just listed some of the things on that slide, but this is a picture out of Indonesia of a Bible translator, and that little pole there with the umbrella is her internet antenna. And she is doing some checking of a Bible translation out literally on the field, and it works. And so it makes me think we use this picture with a story, but we also happen to think, well, if she can do that, then we can also do interviews that way. And we have access to more places in the world than we've ever had before, just thanks to almost universal internet and devices that are able to do that. So I think a lot about Steve Jobs, who introduced the iPhone in 2007 and never knew that it was going to be a tool in fulfilling the Great Commission. So there's that element of common grace to the Apple computer and other tech giants who have done this kind of thing. So it's stewarding the tools we've been given, and that's a huge opportunity. So even if our work looks less like this and more like this, we still have a tremendous opportunity. And my work today looks a whole lot more like the right-hand picture than the left-hand picture. I don't get to travel that much for stories, and I'm getting to an age where I don't enjoy traveling to remote places as much either, but we're still able to do stories that magnify God and his work in the world. So if you feel like you're stuck in an office someplace, don't feel like that's the limitation it once would have been. So this is a scripture that I really base a lot of my work on, and it's Psalm 96:3, the New Living Translation. Publish his glorious deeds among the nations. Tell everyone about the amazing things he does. And it does not go on to say, as long as you can get there. It's like I said, we have opportunities. So let's look at some ways that we can do that, publish his glorious deeds among the nations. There are advantages to telling a story remotely. Travel expense, of course, is zero or close to zero. We can do things in a lot more timely manner. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Fewer geographic or political limitations, although there are some, and in some places when you're talking over the internet, you do have to be careful what you say because you can't assume someone else might not be listening in. But in general, fewer limitations. Asking less of busy people is kind of a big one too, in that when you go to a place, it can take a week out of someone's schedule to kind of shepherd you around. And that's sometimes a really good thing. But it's an easier ask sometimes to say, do you have 45 minutes for an interview or some other similar types of things. And then that last one, their lower performance pressure. I don't know, I'm sure some of you have done international trips where you're expected to bring back a story. And that's a lot of pressure because your organization is spending a lot of money to send you someplace, and suddenly you get that imposter syndrome that we all get that says, this is the day they all realize I have no idea what I'm doing. And you start to worry about things like that. And that passes, and you once you kind of have a story in your notebook or on film or something, then you are realizing that that fear was unfounded. But it is less pressure to do it this way. And if, let's say, you're interviewing somebody in a remote place and you forgot to ask them a key question, it's easier to just call them back sometimes too. So a little bit of advantage there. So let's go to this. 6 strategies for reporting great stories remotely, or if you prefer, getting the most from your Chrysler minivan. So let's start with strategy number 1. I'm going to call this just beat reporting. Those of you who have worked in journalism at all would know this term well. It just means that you are assigned a topic or a beat. Usually that, for me, when I worked in newspapers, that would be City Hall. It could be county government. It could be a religion beat. It could be any number of things, but you are the local expert on that topic, and you know the people that are even more the experts on that topic. So your job is to kind of move around among those circles and find stories. So some things that we do in beat reporting. This is going to be review for a lot of you, but you may pick up a new thing or two. Routinely call and email people for story leads. That's a daily thing, and you just have a list of people that you would rotate around to and talk to, so that within a week or a month, you've kind of hit all of your folks. Read relevant news. So if my area of expertise is going to be Chrysler minivans, then I want to read up on Chrysler minivans and know what's happening. Are there recalls? Are there new models coming out? So you're able to converse intelligently about that topic. Subscribe to ministry newsletters and magazines. Specifically, if you are covering a part of the world or a part of the world where other ministries are active, get their magazines, get their newsletters, their online stuff, and you will get ideas guaranteed. Develop a specialty. I talked about that, but even within your beat, if we want to call it that, you can develop a specialty. So for instance, I've kind of become the person on our team that knows a little bit more about AI because I covered a conference last year. And that's sort of how it goes. You don't necessarily know anything more than anybody else, but you've been around people that do, and that can kind of help you to have that specialty and then help others learn the same thing. Next thing there, build your sources, knowledge, and expectations of what makes a good story. Educate your people as to what you're looking for and help them understand what a story is, what it isn't. That's a whole other topic, I know, but it's something where they will start to understand what you're looking for. Sometimes they will start coming to you with ideas once they know. That's the next one. Make it okay for them to contact you with ideas. That's more than okay. That's what you want, because that makes your job easier. And then always thank them and call attention to their help. I mean, that's a huge help to you. And we don't just want to be take. We want to be a community on this and be thankful for the help that they're giving. So a few types of stories that can be reported remotely. I do a lot of single interview stories right now, which is not the greatest for a deep dive into something, but just for a quick one-off type of an interview, I often write them in Q&A format. One, it's faster, and two, it's a really well-read format. Readers stick with Q&A more than they do just a pile of paragraphs in a story. So that's one thing that I do, and that can be accomplished in a Zoom interview really well. Multiple source, multiple venue story. An example of that would have been when the Ukraine war broke out. I talked to a lot of the Wycliffe organizations in neighboring countries. This is a picture from Wycliffe, Poland. But within a week or so, I had talked to 4 or 5 different organizations and done 4 or 5 stories about their responses to the war. That's not something I could have done in person, and yet I had access to people who were in the know in all of these places. So it was a valuable thing to have. That would encompass the next one too, breaking news and response. Stories you already know. What I mean by that is maybe I've been to a place and something more is happening there now, and I don't have the budget to go back, but I know the place well enough that I can do a Zoom talk or two and write as if I was there, because I know things pretty well there. So that's something that you can kind of leverage for yourself. A process story to explain how something works, that can work really well in a remote story. For instance, how does the Bible translation work for sign languages? That's something you could do with some interviewing and some remote work. An issue story, solving a problem. An example of that would be this one. Consultancy is a big thing in the Bible translation world, where it's kind of the people that check the accuracy of Bible translation and how well it reads in a community and things like that. And that's been a bottleneck in Bible translation. There aren't enough of those people. And so this story was talking to some around the world who are working at solving that problem. And then an anecdote is the last thing there, and that's just telling a short story. Maybe it's not the whole thing, but sometimes those are fun. If you want to talk, just throw a question out to a group of people. What's the funniest thing that ever happened to you on the mission field? Or who is the most interesting person you ever met and why? Those sorts of questions. Have them send you a picture, and you can do a series of little short stories without ever having to leave your desk sometimes. Here's inspiration, I think, for this sort of work. You may have read this book, Unbroken, or they made a movie out of it too. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the author of this book, Laura Hillenbrand, did all these long interviews with Louis Zamperini, who is the World War II veteran, who is the subject of this book, but she never met him in person. Until after the process, after the book was published, she finally got to meet him. But she has something called chronic fatigue syndrome and vertigo, and so she was housebound as she wrote the book. And Louis Zamperini said this. He says at the end, I'm sorry, she said this about him. At the end, he told me that what I wrote was so true to his experience that he kept having to put the book down and look out the window and tell himself, I'm not here, or I'm sorry, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm not there anymore. So her reporting and her interviewing went so deep that she was able to reconstruct a lot of his life without ever having met him. So all to show that it's possible. I have formats spelled wrong here, sorry. Story formats that can be done remotely. Now this, we're not talking about types of stories, but we're talking about different things you can do. So the written story, obviously, the audio story with slides, photo story, video story. Obviously, you need some help with some of these. With the audio and video story, particularly in photo story, you need somebody to send you material or to be your eyes and ears, which I'll get to in a minute. But we don't need to say that these types of stories are out of the realm of possibility just because we can't be there. So more on that in a minute. So strategy one, remember, was beat reporting. Strategy two is plan your trip even if you're not going. What I mean by that is become a student of the place that you are reporting about. So look into geography, climate, culture, latest news from that country or about that country, political climate, religious climate. What's the state of the church there? There are lots of places you can find this information. There are tourism sites for a lot of countries. YouTube videos, those kinds of things. Almost every country will have something from, if you're an American, the US State Department has, like this is their international travel page, and you can pick a country and ask information about it. So I went to Cameroon in December, for instance, and I used this page to find out more about Cameroon. I wasn't going for stories. It was after the one I mentioned earlier. And then you can go to that country's embassy page in your country. So this is the US Embassy, or the Cameroonian Embassy in Washington, D.C. And so you can find lots of interesting information about a country, including some of the links that can take you deeper into news about that country. So this one in Cameroon, it took me to Human Rights Watch, which talked about fallout from the civil war that's been happening in Cameroon. And that was kind of what I was looking for, because the stories dealt with that. And so this became a good background source for me. Google your subject. For me, it was just Cameroon War, and I found several good things. Okay, and so then when you are planning as if you're going to go, but you're not, you're still doing the same thing, lining up interviews, arranging for a translator if needed, working with time differences, verifying technological capabilities. Is the internet going to be fast enough and reliable enough to do video interviewing? Then you plan those recordings and interviews. know the security situation, again, so you don't necessarily say something you shouldn't say in a Zoom meeting or something, and then provide training, and that's to help the people on the ground do some of your work. And that's going to be our next topic here. Strategy 3 is find your eyes and ears. I'll show you several examples of people I know who have been this for me. This is my friend Odabil, who lives in Ghana, in the city of Accra. And I got to mentor Odabil for 3 years when I worked with the seed company. He is now the communication director for Gilbert, which is the Ghana Institute of Literacy, Language, and Bible Translation. I might have some of that switched, but anyway, it's our Wycliffe affiliate in Ghana. And he has done quite a bit of reporting out of Ghana for stories that we've been able to use. Another one is my friend Joel. He's the guy on the left. I did a 3-year internship program with him as well. He's in India. He's teaching university now, but at the time he was helping me teach workshops, and then he did some tremendous reporting from areas of India that would have been hard for me to get to, and we were able to use when I was with the seed company. And the woman in the center here is my friend Zetsat. She is in Ethiopia, and she also did an internship with us, communications internship. And she ended up not only doing some stories for us, but was a very good photographer and could get us photos out of the remote parts of Ethiopia that we weren't able to get to. So again, eyes and ears in different places and developing those contacts, even if you're doing some of the editing work later. And then the last person I'll show you is my friend Isaac, who's on the right here, who is from Cameroon, Northwest Cameroon, where some of the war had been going on in the past few years. He now lives in Yaoundé and works for Cabtal, which is the Cameroonian Bible translation organization. And he's the guy that we sent at his request. We wouldn't have probably suggested this, but he was very willing and wanted to go into some of these areas where war and violence had been very recent, and to talk to Bible translation teams about how they managed. And so what happened was Isaac went and got a lot of this information, did the written story himself, but sent me the raw video clips, and I was able to take those and edit videos that he had shot, and again, on a phone. No, I'm sorry, not on a phone. He had actually shot those on a DSLR, but we've done this in other places with someone on a phone as well, where they're just able to shoot some B-roll or some interviews for you, and then you get it back and can use it. So let me just show you quickly one of those short videos. Let's see if I can make this work.
I stepped in during the crisis period, and I saw the resilience with which my parents were translating the Bible. And since I could speak Mancon and write it, I saw it as a place at least to come in and also put in my own small effort to see that the Bible was translated, the New Testament. I remember quite all right, there was a day when we came together, and since the office is directly opposite the police post, there was confrontation. There was shooting and shooting. We did not even know that some of the members would come, but they still braved it. When there was a little pause, they braved it and came in. And even while there was still heavy shooting. And so when the shooting started, we just sat quiet in the corner, and prayers were going on. And then when the things subsided, we went on with our translation, knowing that God was with us. And we had it in our minds that you can only die on your day. If it is not ordained that you will die on such a day, such and such a day, God cannot take you away. That is what kept us moving and moving. The New Testament is going to create an impact in Mancon. It's going to create an impact, especially as the translated version into Mancon, because there are many people, especially the elderly population, they don't understand the English language. So when they hear Mancon spoken, that the Bible read in Mancon, it means so much to them. And most of them, when they come out, they are so elated and they say, no, the work should go on. That the thing is touching them. But now that the white man used to talk that thing like that, they were not understanding. Now they are understanding it very well. So it's really going to create an impact. And even those of the younger generation, they find it very strange because everybody knew or knows that the Bible is only in English. For us, it's a strange thing because we have never known that the Bible could be translated into even a different language. We don't know that it's in English or in French. So everybody is so excited about it. When I read a Testament in the Mancon language, I really feel that I belong. It is not a strange thing again to me. I feel that I'm part of the thing. It is my thing. And when I'm talking even to the next person, it is our thing.
Sorry, I'm getting reorganized here. So the fun thing about this one was just the fact that we were able to put 7 videos together based on short interviews and some B-roll shot by someone who had not done video before. And it can work. And you can do all that remotely and kind of be the editor back in an office where you're receiving all this, and you can put together some very good material if you can just do a little bit of training with someone on how to put some video together. So I'm making sure we're still working here. Okay. So to do that, it's finding out who your primary contact person is in a place like that, and then helping that person understand what or who you're looking for. It might be some technical skills, which we've got some information to help with that if needed. It can be discussing potential stories and angles. In this case, we kind of knew what we were looking for, and our guy on the field knew what he was looking for, so that helped a lot. But we've also done this with people who were just kind of giving instructions as we go, and they can help you find a person who exemplifies the broader story. So having people in a place on the ground and able to do some of this work, even if it's not the final work, can be really huge for you. So here's strategy 4, impactful interviews from a distance. We'll talk a little bit about some ways that you can get good information from interviews, even when you're not directly on scene with the person. And again, I would always say that there's no substitute for being there, but that's not always the option. So part of that is going to be working with a translator if you are doing cross-cultural work. And so it's choosing someone familiar with the topic and not just the 2 languages. So in our case, we like to have someone who's been around Bible translation because they're able to understand what the person is talking about rather than just translating words that they may not know the meaning of. We do send a list of questions in advance almost always, and the translator gets to see those as well as the person that I'm interviewing. And this one's key too. When you're working with a translator, you tell them you're looking for quotes, not just paraphrases, because I've worked with translators who have just boiled things, they'll listen to someone for 30 seconds and then give me 1 sentence to say what they thought the meaning was. But we are wanting quotes, so we want to know exactly what that person said. And if they do need to paraphrase, ask them to tell you that they're doing that so that you know what's a quote and what isn't. And then if it's an audio or video interview, ask them not to talk over the person, the interviewee. So you kind of have to develop a rhythm working with a translator. It takes a little bit of practice, and it doesn't always go well, but usually well enough to come up with what you need. And then making everyone comfortable. You have your translator and interviewee choose a comfortable, quiet place. Send a list of questions in advance. Again, I mentioned that. Always mention that you're going to have other questions too, so you're not limited to that list. But it's kind of a starting point. It makes people feel more comfortable, especially if they're not used to being interviewed. And most of the people we talk to are not used to being interviewed very often. I do tell them exactly how and where I plan to use the interview and verify that they're okay with this. So we want to be sure they know this is going to be on the internet. And if we need to conceal identity or location or something like this, then we'll do that. But we kind of need to have that agreement with them in terms of what are we able to say. It's easy to forget about that when you're in a remote setting and you're not on the ground with someone. And you start to think, well, everything is as open and safe as it is where I'm sitting, and that isn't, of course, the case sometimes. As you would do in person, start with friendly small talk with an interview, and then at the point you're ready for the formal interview, I always start with prayer. And I think that's something not only that is God honoring and helpful to me in the interview process, but I think it just helps the person know you're on common footing there too. When you're interviewing another believer that you haven't met before, starting with prayer just really does open things in a good way. And I've always had good results. And I think God always answers those prayers when we ask for him to just help us to deliver the story that he wants told. Some specific questions for remote interviews that might not come up in person. Sometimes I'll ask, where are you? What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? That sounds strange, but and you may use some of those details and not all of them, but sometimes you'll use them. And what's the weather like there? Again, they may not even thought about it because the weather may be the same 365 days a year, but depending on your audience, it may be interesting to them. So it's good to know. Or if it seems awkward to ask that, sometimes I'll just look it up later and look at what the temperature was that day or something. Is there anything interesting or unusual happening in your city or area? Again, just to put your audience there a little bit. And then aside from the formal questions, can you show me around? Can you, if you're on a phone camera, can we take a walk? If they're on Zoom with a laptop, maybe they can turn, depending on whether it's corded or not, can we turn and look at where you are? And then as they're showing me around, I'll take lots of notes it's less important what they're saying at that point and what I'm seeing, because it just helps me to know how to describe a place when I'm writing a story that from a place that I haven't been. And you're watching for scenes and dialogue as well. If people are talking to your person or if you see people interacting, that may be something you can use. My practice is just to write down everything I see, basically. And you never know what might become a relevant detail that you can use. But for remote interviews, it's really fun to have someone walk you around and show you around a town or a village. Okay, strategy 5, leverage technology. And that's going to be a variation on some of what we've already talked about here. Record the meeting in Zoom to your computer or the cloud, all 3 views, because you can use all of them when you construct a video. So the view of each speaker and then the view of all speakers together. I do always ask permission for any recording, whether it's audio or video. I don't always know the laws in every country, of course, but I know in Illinois, where I live, you cannot record someone without them knowing it. So I always am careful about that one. And it's the ethical thing to do as well. If the translator's on site with your interviewee, have them sit together, but the camera only on the interviewee. We don't really need to see the translator in most cases. and then if the Zoom connection or the audio is bad, you can have the source or the interviewee record responses on their phone and send you the file. So even if you have an internet problem, that's a way to work around that, is sometimes they can email you the audio file or put it in a Dropbox or something like that. And then remember too, that in some cases now Zoom can transcribe in real time. So otherwise you can use transcription services, you can transcribe it yourself. But there are some shortcuts to getting something done fast out of a Zoom meeting or anything else as well, where you're recording an interview. If Zoom is not possible due to internet or access, whatever that might be, again, you can send the questions to your translator and have that person send the translated questions to the person you want to interview. And then that person can record audio or video responses or just type them. You can do an email interview as well. And then they email either the answers to you or the file back to the translator. The translator translates it back to your language, and you've got something you can work with. Photos and video, again, ask your interviewee or someone else on site to shoot photos and video B-roll. So make a shot list before and during your conversation. Things will always occur during the conversation that you want to say afterwards, hey, could you get me a picture of this? And remember that your interviewee should be in some of these pictures. So if they're the ones taking the pictures or shooting the video, you want to make sure they're handing the camera to someone else now and then too, so that they're in them. And that will lead us to strategy 6, which is provide training. I have taught quite a few workshops for people who aren't necessarily communication experts, but who need to be able to report stories from their locations. And one of the things we always do is photo training. And we always teach on phones, because I don't ever want to assume someone's going to have any more equipment available than a basic phone with a camera. But after an hour of training, sometimes we get some really interesting results, and people are sometimes very good photographers and videographers. So I'm going to show you several shots from this happening in Ethiopia with a group of Bible translators. Again, these are not people who typically shoot pictures for a living or even on the side very often. We just gave them some instruction prior about composing good photos, about what to look for, about just getting at eye level with people and working within the limitations of your camera phone. And you get some really, really good results. And so photos in particular, sometimes asking someone in a remote location to write something for you may not be as easy, but you can get notes and information. But with photos, a little bit of training does go a long way. And if you need resources to be able to point people to photo training, there's a lot of it online. We do have some. If you go to wycliffe.net and then down to communications, and then there's a whole page full of some training, we have a style guide and things like that on there too. But the training would include videos like how to take better photos, or hey, this sounds familiar, finding great stories when you can't be there in person. So there's kind of a library of stuff that either you can use or you can pass on to people who can be your eyes and ears if you need them to shoot some videos or photos in places. So let's do a little bit of review here about some of the tactics and media we've talked about. So video interview, if possible, is always where I would want to start, because it gives me the most options afterwards with what I can do with that material. If that's not possible, then audio only can be great. An email interview can work, especially if there's a translation involved. That can be helpful. The problem with email interviews can be that they sound very stiff, because sometimes the person has either had someone write the answers for them or help them with it, or they go back and rewrite and it doesn't sound the way they talk. And with stories, you want to sound the way people would talk. And so you're kind of careful with email interviews, but it can work. In fact, I've used it many times. B-roll if possible. Again, if you're not familiar, B-roll are those little short clips of things going on in a place where the person is that you're interviewing, and you might lay those over the top of the interview, but it gives you some context of where that person is and what they're doing. Photos can also serve as B-roll, and you can use them as photos, obviously, in websites and print publications. But with a little bit of panning and zooming, sometimes photos can make a really nice B-roll addition to a video when you didn't have actual video other than a person talking, or even if you only have audio and you want to make a video out of that, sometimes photos and panning and zooming can accomplish that. Maps are another thing that can be useful for any story, other than audio, of course, but a video story or a written story, maps to kind of place people where that's going on. Translation, always an issue. So in any cross-cultural situation, at least, translation always an issue. So be sure that you're working that out early and often, and then using care and showing sensitive locations or faces. So those are some of the high points. And then I would kind of wrap up with this. Remember why we do this. Stewarding God's stories is a huge reason. He has given us responsibility for stories in our grasp that maybe no one knows about and that maybe no one's ever gotten to tell. And if it's within my reach, even electronically, then it can be my responsibility to tell those stories and tell them as best I can. The next one is honoring the people you interview. Put dignity first and recognize that this may be awkward for them. They've probably never been interviewed before. So I just always think of videos that don't do this well, and some ministries are guilty of this, but where you never learn the person's name or you never really hear directly from them. Some of these fundraising commercials you see on TV are the worst at this, where they just they appeal to pity into your emotions without ever really telling a story. I really, really try to avoid that, and I want people to get to know this person, and I think they're an interesting person, or I wouldn't be talking to them, so I'd love for others to get to know them as well. And that helps destroy stereotypes. That's the next one. You know, a lot of times you'll see pictures of people in a cross-cultural situation and they're in native dress. And that may be for a festival or something, but sometimes that can really work against getting to know people and knowing a culture, because people think it's this primitive culture when actually they look a whole lot like anybody else in a large city anywhere. They just happen to be dressed that way for a festival. And so let's be sure that that's not the image we're putting forth as how someone lives or works. And then the last one, or I'm sorry, two more. Danger of a single story. You want to watch a really good TED Talk, Google that one. It's a Nigerian author who does this, but it's the danger of making one person's story the story of a whole culture. And you want to be very careful, especially when you're not there, to not assume that this person represents a whole group of people. This is one person's story. And so just not overstating the meaning of a story, but instead getting to know one person's story and situation and not trying to make it represent a whole culture. And then the last thing is, don't just take. We're ministering to people. And so often your visit is a really big deal if you're going in person, but when you're talking to someone online, it's also a really big deal. Again, people don't get interviewed very often for stories. And so, yes, it might be your job, and yes, it might be 1 out of 40 things you're doing that week. But remember, it's a big deal, and it's a good thing to be just empathetic with what that person is dealing with, and to see how you can help them. Here's the thing. Back to my Chrysler minivan. God provides what we need to do what he calls us to do, but it won't always be what we think we need. So I would love to have a travel budget to be able to go all over the world and get these stories firsthand. That's not reality. It's even less reality since COVID and since things budget-wise have really kind of been tightened down more than they ever were. And so we've got to find creative ways, but God does provide these creative ways. I think about this a lot, and that if COVID had happened 20 years ago, the world would have looked very different, and our ability to tell stories would have looked very different than it looked 3 years ago. And that goes on. We have access to people and places that other generations just didn't, and so we should be using that and stewarding that well. We can jump to some conversation if you like. Here are a couple of feeder questions for that, but we can go any direction you want. What's one thing I learned in today's session that I can try in the next month? And what new possibilities could I think about as a result of today's session? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can just talk for a few minutes. That's more fun.
Great. We already have a question, Jim. Micah has asked, I wonder how you handle photo permissions with dispersed media capture. Do you use photos and videos that don't have explicit permission, especially if you weren't the person who took the photo or video?
Yeah, it's a great question for one. It comes up all the time. It depends on the circumstance. It depends sometimes on where the photo was shot, or video too. If it's in a public setting where, gosh, any public setting, you could reasonably be expected to be on video these days. But if you're in a public place, then the permissions are less important, but it's still not a bad idea, particularly if there are kids in the picture. If it's not apparently a public setting, then it's a great idea to at least have gotten verbal permission from the person. Sometimes there's a language barrier where the person isn't going to be able to sign a form or something, but verbal permission helps. It's not as good as I would like it to be, because I'd love to be able to tell them, hey, this might go on the internet and the whole world might see this. But we do have release forms that we do use for video interviews, if it's someone who is able to do that, and if there isn't a language barrier, and even if there is, sometimes we'll get those translated. But yeah, it's kind of a moving target with that subject, because photo permissions and availability can change. The thing about something being on the internet is it could be there a very long time. And we're also careful about reviewing what we have on the internet in terms of photos. And if something was a safe place 10 years ago and no longer is, then we could be putting someone in jeopardy unwittingly. So not the clearest answer, I know, but the answer I would give is try and do your best to get whatever permissions you can, even if it's verbal. It helps, and it's ethical regardless of what the legal situation is.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. Can you provide us with your email address so if people wanted to get in touch with you, they could?
Yeah, it's Jim_Killam, KILLAM, at Wycliffe.net. And a lot of the resources I was showing you toward the end there are also at Wycliffe.net under the communications page. So that's the Wycliffe Global Alliance page. We have a Facebook group as well. And I have a blog called Go Tell It that I need to write for a lot more often than I do, but it's out there as well. If you search my name and Go Tell It, you'll find that.
That's great. I have another question for you. And also just encourage any of you who are still on here, you're welcome to post your questions in the chat panel. I'll bring them up with Jim as you post them. Jim, you mentioned, I think, a couple of challenges that you've experienced, but I just want to ask you if you can think of a specific example of a challenge you've experienced reporting remotely and how you solved it?
A lot of times it's technological, like a Zoom feed will go out, or, we'll have trouble connecting with someone. And sometimes that's just following up with an email and repeating the questions that way or something. So, and I can think of times when I had somebody who was only going to be available that day who we still couldn't talk to. And so there's so many ways to talk now. So if Zoom doesn't work, WhatsApp sometimes is a great way to kind of fill that gap. It may not work for video, it may, but you can at least chat back and forth, and you kind of know the place that you're speaking with, or the where that person is. What are some of the major communication apps that they're using? So it could be Instagram or something, but more often than not, I find it's WhatsApp. And so that's a good one to be communicating with. So it's just kind of solving little problems as they pop up. And you kind of have to be ready for things not to go well, and then not panic and not freak out, but just, okay, this doesn't work, let's try this. And usually there's a way you can do it. And again, eyes and ears on the ground somewhere else. If you've got someone helping you in another place, that's huge.
That's great. Let's see, we don't have any other questions yet. Jim, is there anything else in particular? Well, actually, I do have another question. I think some of the folks on here, they're leaders, may not think that's investing time in storytelling is worth it. So this is a way that's less expensive, but it still takes resources of time. So what's something that you would advise them about how they could talk to their leaders about why investment of their time in doing this kind of story gathering is worth it?
Yeah, well, you and I have both run into this over the years, haven't we? It's going to be a constant question because money is always limited. Travel is very limited. And there's a question of, do we really need these stories? And I think it's got to go beyond fundraising and go to stewardship of story. I mentioned that before, that there is a video on the Wycliffe.net page that I showed you called Stewardship of Story that kind of outlines some of that. But if you can get your people to understand that this isn't just about journalism, or this isn't just about telling someone's story, but this is glorifying God, and that maybe this story has never been told before, and we may have access to stuff that no one's ever gotten to know about. And I find that to be a really persuasive argument, not so much with those above me who might control the money, but those on the field who this is not their job. So Bible translators in particular is who I tend to work the most with. And sometimes you have to make that case that, yeah, I know this isn't your job, but look at what we could do with this. And again, fundraising is not priority one for most people. It's a necessary thing, but that's not what motivates us. But stewarding God's story is glorifying God through a story that you might be able to tell well. That's kind of exciting. And I think I've seen Bible translators really light up with that argument versus, hey, we need to raise some money, so let's do a story, or, hey, we just need stories. A lot of times that's as far as it goes, is we need stories from you. Well, that's one of 1,000 things they have to do that week, and it's not going to be a high priority. So a little bit of explanation about why this is important, and how God can use this, not just to raise money, but how God could use this to further his kingdom. That's kind of fun.
That's great. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our audience with as we wrap up?
No, feel free to email me, I guess, and connect privately if you want, but I'm happy to help anybody or point anybody in a direction. If you're frustrated, if you're confused about how I should cover a story, or what might I have access to that I'm not sure about, yeah, I'm happy to help you sort that out, I guess. But it's just creative thinking, I think, and creative problem solving. And like you said at the beginning, I've worked in journalism 40 years, which makes it sound like I'm 95 years old here or something, but it's changed radically. And we can complain about that, or we can roll with it, and we can find new and interesting ways to tell stories. One thing I did recently was a podcast for the first time. I hadn't done podcasting before, but we had a long interview with a guy from SIL who was the original originator of Vision 2025. John Waters is his name. Heather, you probably know him. And we talked about how that all started. And it was about a 40-minute interview that we did on Zoom video like this. And I produced a video, but then we realized nobody's really going to watch a 40-minute interview video unless they're really, really interested in this. And then they already probably know. So we busted it up into 2 audio podcasts, and people can listen to it in their cars and things like that. And we've gotten some really good response from that. So it's finding the best way to deliver a story that you might not have thought of in the past. And there's so many different opportunities and options right now that it's kind of fun.
That's great. Can you tell us the name of your book and how people can get that as well?
Yeah, most recently it was Go Tell It. I don't remember the whole subtitle, but it's telling God's stories in words, pictures, and videos. I think it's Moody Publishers. Amazon has it. It's anywhere you can find books. It's 10 years old now, so if there's technical information in there, it's going to be a little bit dated, but there isn't a whole lot of technical stuff. It's mostly just the thinking behind why to tell great stories and how you can do that. So I don't think that ever goes out of style.
That's great. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If we could go ahead and stop the recording just